2023 meeting of the Legislative Subcommittee. I always forget, do we need to take roll on these?
Sure.
We should.
Be
We should
happy
probably
to do
take
that.
roll. Thank you.
Mayor McEachern,
Here.
Assistant Mayor Kelly. Here. Councilor Tabor.
Here.
City Manager Conard.
Here.
Jane Freedy's here.
All right. I'll wait a motion to approve the minutes of the October 21st, 2022 minutes.
So moved. Oh, second?
All in favor?
Aye.
And then we're going to review adopted legislative principles and procedures for testimony.
The only reason I included these is because, just as a reminder and a refresher of the principles that we do have, and just for a point of reference, in the event that there's something that you folks want as a priority that doesn't happen to appear on the principles that we've already adopted. We might just revisit these as we go through some of the bills and the discussions to make sure we match, rather than specifically, review both of these, which were approved in February of 2022, if that's okay with the committee.
Okay with me?
Is there an example where we would have needed to so far?
Well, some things are very generic. There's a bunch of bills that I believe the assistant mayor is going to bring up relative to rents and requiring landlords to, notify on eviction and that sort of thing. That's a little beyond, sort of what we've weighed in on in support, but it could be if we amended the workforce housing or, the housing principle. That's all I'm talking about, stuff like that. If we want to move on to some of the bills, a lot of the hearings are now in full swing. There's over 1,100 bills. Part of the goal of today's meeting is to try to get some direction from the committee insofar as, what are the topics that you really want to focus on. One of the things that's very different this year, as you all know, is how close the House membership is between Republicans and Democrats. And what I'm hearing through the grapevine is that makes the committee recommendations not very effective, because you have a 50-50 split. Mm-hmm. So years ago, when we would go before the House and we would submit written testimony, we were trying to convince the committee to, follow whatever recommendation, either oppose or support a particular bill. And then, because our reps work so hard within their committees, oftentimes they aren't familiar with the 1,000 bills that are coming to them to vote, so they will follow the recommendations of their party. So this year is a little more challenging, because we really won't know, regardless of the committee recommendation, how a vote's going to go, because it's going to be how many people show up to the floor. So that is just sort of a new reality. Maybe it will compel some bipartisan support, but it's just different than it used to be. Whereas in the Senate, we still have the 14-10 split, smaller number of, obviously, senators. So just kind of throw that out there, and just so this committee knows it's a different climate this year. So, and following up on Senator Perkins Quokka's housing bills, I listed 3 of them that she sponsored relative to housing, and they're in your packet. Senate Bill 145 is the Housing Champion Program. Senate Bill 244 is creating housing opportunity zones. And Senate Bill 47 is a commission to study housing density. And, all of those would definitely fit into our legislative principles of supporting workforce housing. There are no hearings scheduled for any of these particular bills, but I wanted to make sure the committee knew that what was discussed at our last meeting actually came forward as bills, and that was something that was important, I know, to the committee in the priorities.
So on that one, Jane, was there, I know that it specifically asked, and I think Senator Perkins Coca had taken it under advisement, the ability to let cities and towns set their own rate of affordability with regard to new construction. Did that make it?
There is enabling legislation that allows a requirement for workforce housing.
But not municipality urban, specific?
Yeah, so, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess, what does that mean?
Let me get the housing champion. I think that's in the housing champion. Just one second. Sorry about that. I'll look at 145. It should be scanned. A percentage of the construction that it enables municipalities to require a developer for a particular percentage. I think it's 10%.
20?
And I think it's 10. Is it 20?
We've got language in Rebecca's SB 224 for 20.
For 20. And I believe that it also discusses what the income qualifications were. And for SB 244, it's 100% of the median income. So that's very different. It's not like the federal requirement that says in order to qualify for this type of housing, you have to have 60% of the median
Sure.
income or whatever. So that's 244, the Housing Opportunity Zone bill. But 145, which I'm not seeing right off the top of my head, is the piece that is the enabling legislation that allows for a municipality to require a developer to devote a particular percentage to workforce housing.
And so, housing opportunity zones, how is that constricted? Like, I guess the expectation would be blanket across the city, or that was the expectation of the previous discussion.
I believe this allows you to designate a specific location for that inclusionary housing opportunity zone.
Well, it gives tax relief to the
Right.
person.
So you wouldn't do it
wouldn't
everywhere.
want the whole city.
Yeah, it's a tax.
Okay, so is there a way to change this? I guess, like, that's not really interesting, to give tax relief. I guess it seems like we might have made that, or it might have been kind of, like, here in Portsmouth, folks would be fine with no more development, completely. I would say vast majority of the city would be totally supportive of not having more development, unless there was a requirement that development had a percentage of that new construction be affordable, and not through a tax relief or giving money back. Just, this doesn't happen unless
Straight up
we
construction of units.
we have a percentage coming in as affordable.
Yeah, I believe that is in Senate Bill 145. So the Senate Bill 244 is the housing opportunity zone, which is the incentivize the finance piece of it, lets a developer get a credit. And also, I think they can demonstrate to the planning board, that there's an out if the economic viability of the development, and they can get some relief on some requirements and some cost factors relating to the improvements. The SB 145 is where you can, as a city, require X percent of a development to be.
Okay, and what else is in the Housing Champion bill?
That's pretty much it. The inclusionary zone, and then the tax release component of the housing opportunity zones.
Sorry, I thought 145 was no tax relief.
I'm trying to look right now. Unfortunately, it's not coming up. Do any of you have the?
Kevin can show it on Zoom if that's helpful.
Yeah.
He now has the capability.
I I don't think we got a text
no.
of SB 145.
Yeah, that's what I'm, New Hampshire.
But we can look it up
Why don't
online.
I
Yeah,
go here?
sorry about that, guys.
No worries. The-
I am
I don't know if this, I'll try.
calling it up. Quick links.
And again, this would be, there's language in that, we would expect language, this is an opt-in, so Hampton wouldn't have to do it.
Yes,
Seabrook
exactly.
wouldn't have to do it.
Okay, here we go. So the bill 145. All right.
No, no, there we go. No, it's not coming up.
Okay, view the bill. Introduced.
I went to the
General
NHMA.
court ones are not coming up. Yeah, I do too.
Would NHMA have it on their bill tracker?
They would, yeah, if we can click on that link.
Ugh. Come on.
I got it. Okay. I mean, it's only on my phone, but.
I'll try to
The
pull
bill
it here.
establishes the New Hampshire Housing Champion Designation Program, including a housing production municipality grant program and a housing infrastructure municipal grant and loan program. The bill also establishes positions with the Department of Business and Economic Affairs and makes appropriation to the program. And, let's see.
Is there a way to search here?
So it seems like quite a large bill.
Yes.
With loans and things like that, not a specific carve-out to allow us the local control to,
Yeah, is there a bill that just says?
Like a
town-
standalone?
Towns can require a certain percentage of affordable units.
My recollection, it was in this bill. Having a hard time reading it.
I feel like whenever they call something a housing champion bill, and it's introduced like by a Republican or Democrat, the other side is going to think it's definitely not a champion bill. We'll get pretty flowery with the language on it.
If you know how to search the bill tracker on this computer, we can try that, but I can't search it, so.
Yeah, I
Does it make sense to print them out?
Okay, it doesn't seem like it seems like it's stuck in a larger thing. That was not really the
Yeah,
intent of it.
exactly. It's not a standalone. It's
But-
baked in
Okay.
in other particular
So I
provisions.
guess we would
of-
have to know what's in the housing champion loan to be able to support it more fully. Having education requirements for our boards is kind of a waste of
Yeah,
time.
exactly.
From my perspective, and, it's just like training for training's sake and just a waste of money. So that they're not going to change their opinion by having to sit in a Zoom, talking about, this is, just seems like propaganda to them. So would like to see what else is in support there, or in the bill to be able to support that or not.
We have time on that. I don't think anything is scheduled on that for a bit, so I can report back on that. The other one, SB 47, is just a commission to study housing density. It's just a commission. It just looks at zoning, looks at means by which increasing density might improve workforce housing. It has,
Do
particular.
we need to study that to know that?
Right.
I guess, it seems like, commissions have to cost some sort of time or money. Is it just staffed
Right,
by?
it would just be a report out in November from to make particular recommendations, which then presumably springboards legislation, but this in and of itself wouldn't be legislation on density, although there are bills that are before the House and Senate on increasing density for residential housing this session.
Okay.
And then there were state retirement bills. The good news is that HB 50 came back again. Rather than a one-time payment of 7.5, it's an annual obligation of the state to contribute that particular amount to 2 classifications of employees, teachers, and police and fire.
Good for all towns.
Good for everybody. That is good for everyone. So there was a hearing on that. The city registered in support of that without further written testimony. The other bill, House Bill 555, is relative to the accrued unfunded liability for the retirement system. As you know, there is a huge amount of money that is in the unfunded liability. This particular bill proposes that some of the surplus, quite a bit of the state's surplus, be paid towards that unfunded accrued liability for the retirement. How that affects municipalities is presumably the employer contribution would then go down significantly because this unfunded liability has been paid off. So that is something, I'm assuming, and NHMA is a champion and support of that as well, because it helps all municipalities, if in fact it moves forward, to reduce that unfunded accrued liability, which is hugely financially impactful for an employer's contribution to all of the retirement in the state. The other bill that we did send
So
testimony.
just, sorry, on that, the 50 and 55, so this goes, and I think this was, maybe it's the first time I noticed it in our conversations with Judy, but the unfunded portion accounts for 70% of the cost that we share with, or 70% of the cost of the retirement for the employer, not the employee, correct?
It's the employer cost,
And so-
exactly.
And this started, I guess, 40 or 50 years ago when the state said, hey, we're going to consolidate all of your pension systems so that it comes under one roof. Is it a fair assumption to say that the retirement that you get in Portsmouth is the same retirement you get in Manchester, or is that negotiated through collective bargaining individually?
That's a great question.
That is a great question.
So maybe a follow-up on that to know, like, whether or not, because, the state is not going to want to pay if our benefits, if this encourages us to create better benefits than in Manchester. But if it's my assumption is correct and they're all the same.
They're all 70% or
They're
whatever
all-
that percentage was.
Oh, no, so sorry. What I mean is the benefits, like the actual benefits upon retirement, is that the same for Portsmouth as it is Manchester?
The classification of employee is the same everywhere. So you've got your 3 classes. You've got your teachers in one class, you've got your police and fire in another, and then you have your government, everybody else is in class 3. There's hugely complicated,
Well,
definitions and
what
who
we can
gets
do is
what.
confirm that, a teacher in Portsmouth retiring gets the same allocation as a teacher in Manchester.
Right, okay. And then, I think this was originally, we were separate before, and the state said, hey, it's going to be easier for us to manage this on behalf of everybody if you come in to the fold, and we're going to make it worth your while by paying 30% of the cost.
35.
35%
35, yeah.
of the cost of retirement to sweeten the pot. I would imagine that, given our track record in Portsmouth, if we had continued on outside of the state and now, with our AAA bond rating and our generally healthy finances, we would have not been in the position of getting, over the barrel when it comes to taking that down from 35 to 30 because we thought we were going to get 10% returns in the 90s forever, and then the economic crisis of 2008. So, I very much support. I just want to make sure that we understand, that this is separate, and yeah, they should use the money to to pay down the cost? Because right now, it's scheduled to be done in 2039, I think,
Right, far, far away,
if ever.
if ever. And we did submit testimony in support of House Bill 311, which you got a copy of, which is wastewater funding and those projects. The other bill that is concerning and has a fiscal impact is House Bill 647. That is a bill that would eliminate all government immunity. And NHMA did a little summary and discussion of, what those impacts are. As you all know, there are certain liability caps when a government is sued. There's a certain amount of money for a personal injury for an individual, and a cap on, more than one individual if someone, say, for instance, slips and falls. One example, one consequence of this bill is that would be completely removed. So there would be no cap on liability. It would permit monetary damages for every single action against a municipality, which doesn't exist in many cases. There's immunity. We have immunity from particular suits as a government, a sovereign immunity. You can't, sue the king, sort of thing. So there are certain classifications of things
Sovereign
that.
immunity, that's what that is.
Yeah, so that we simply don't, we're simply exempt from lawsuits, right? Because of those principles on certain types of suits. Basically, this particular bill does away with pretty much absolutely everything. It creates a right to sue for monetary damages, and the expense to that would be obviously borne by the taxpayer and the city, because the insurance premiums that cities would have to pay to insure themselves would go up incredibly. I reached out to Mike Ricker, who is an attorney for Primex. He has been working very closely with NHMA to give them advice as to, how this could financially impact municipalities. It's a risk pool, right, for insurance, and so you have X amount of claims, and so they quote what everybody has to pay for insurance on whatever the risk pool is. This bill, if it passed, would expand that risk pool because there'd be so many more other types of actions that could be taken, and therefore the premium to be insured would be much higher. Also, there's the way the bill is written. It's in the event the government made an error and a lawsuit is brought, and then you fixed it for whatever reason, or you tried to settle it, you still might be obligated to pay the attorney fees associated with that. So there is somewhat of a disincentive for settlement, the way the language of this bill is written. And the whole attorney fees things is something that, typically attorney fees are not awarded unless there's some, gross wanton negligence on the part of anybody, not just governments. But this would make the award of attorney fees, much more frequent. And the other issue is with this bill is that, it just would also, the floodgates would open, so to speak, on the types of suits that would be requesting monetary damages. And so we have not submitted any written testimony relative to this, but we did register an opposition because this is obviously affects our fiscal ability to function. And so this is something that we certainly want to watch. NHMA is really taking the lead in opposing this because of the fiscal impacts on municipalities in the event that this passes.
And it's not to say that you can't sue the city of Portsmouth, but in order to get past the bar of sovereign immunity, there has to be some sort of provable gross negligence on our behalf in order to take and file suit. Is that correct?
Well, there are certain suits that people can just take by statutory authority. I mean,
Sure, they can sue us on decisions that we make all the
exactly,
time.
but we don't always have monetary damages, linked to those types of suits. If somebody, if it's a right to know situation, it's not just attorney fees, it's monetary damages and attorney fees they'd be asking for. So, if we are brought in, or, there's some claim of, I don't know, any claim, faulty notice, any right to know. And the other thing that's concerning is land use board decisions, right? So we have our, that's a government, action. Land board's decision makes something favorable or unfavorable to either an applicant or an intervener. Then, what's the monetary damages there? So I'm sure this will be something that's closely watched, but it's something that you should be aware of.
Can I jump in? I have some clarification on the teacher in
Oh,
different.
sure.
The amount that's contributed in is state mandated and the same, but municipalities could have different
Salary
packages on top of that. So the calculation, however, is the same for retirees in New Hampshire retirement when they retire, just based on their years of service. So, and if Manchester were to put in a different package or incentive for retirees, they could do that over and above the mandated
Right,
amount.
out of their own money.
Right.
Okay.
But it's mandated what folks are supposed to put in and what they get out.
Uniform
years of service.
Uniform contribution
Correct.
for all cities and towns.
Uniform contribution and then uniform
Distribution.
distribution from that retirement, from this system.
Correct.
And so if we wanted to do something in addition to that, that would be done by the city of Portsmouth
Yep,
regardless.
through collective bargaining, right.
Okay, so uniform in, uniform out. Got it. Counselor Cook?
Thank you, Mayor. I have to apologize first for being late this morning. For some reason, I had this in my calendar at 10:30.
no
I
worries.
was sitting, waiting to come, so here I am. And thank you to the city manager for alerting me.
Sure.
So on this particular bill that we were discussing, are there examples of states that have this legislation in place?
I doubt there is a state that has this legislation in
This
place.
is,
So I'm asking this question
Extreme.
because there's just a really close analogy here to litigation and healthcare, because what you see is states that don't have limits on liability, and you can sue for anything in healthcare,
Oh, sure.
that doctors flee and hospitals flee and hospitals go out of business. Pennsylvania has a major problem with hospitals going out of
Yeah.
business because there's no limits on litigation in healthcare. But states that have those limits in place, like New Hampshire, can retain not only healthcare workers, but hospitals.
Yeah, the difference between us and, the only difference, and that's a great analogy, is that
It is a great analogy.
we unfortunately can't set up shop, in another state. They would frown.
Exactly.
They'd frown on that. Yeah, but
Exactly.
that is a good analogy, and I think that we should certainly be opposed to this. I would imagine that this would, for the governor to sign this and not veto this bill would be shocking to me, to take away or increase his ability as the state of New Hampshire and the liability that the state would, I'm assuming, would also face in this, or no? Is this limited just to
This does
municipal-
preserve some of the legislature's own immunity,
Oh,
as well
oh,
as
perfect.
judicial immunity.
Yeah.
However, the local
Yeah. Or we might want to put
municipalities
that
are.
into, we'll be happy to reconsider our position if the legislature is also removes their immunity.
However, the voters are made up of the local municipalities who would be
Okay.
subject to this. So I think the governor would pay attention to that.
Who brought that bill forward? I'm trying to find it.
Let's see, 674. It is Representative Lakis, Representative Smith, Representative Mannion, Representative Popovici Muller, and Senator Murphy.
I think it would be interesting to look at who's supporting this. I would guess it's the trial lawyers.
Opposed to this. I
Well, no.
don't imagine the trial lawyers would.
Or litigate, like, it's good for litigation attorneys.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's an ecosystem. I mean, it would collapse our system of government pretty quickly in the amount that we would then be, if,
Oh, our insurance
Primex isn't going to be supportive of it as was discussed. They're not getting any of this money. It would just be risk pools to pay out claims. And then, eventually, we would have no incentive to ever settle as it's written because, we could still be found liable there. But I think we should, definitely oppose, and this goes against, a few legislative principles, but I don't know if we're going to need to. It seems like I would be surprised what the recommendation, has this gone through committee? Or is anything going through committee, or they're just going?
There was a hearing, but I don't think a report's
Okay.
this week, but I don't believe a report's been generated yet on
And
this.
the municipal association, I assume, is strongly opposed
Very,
to this.
very, very much opposed, banging the drum, reaching out to municipalities, making people aware of it, because I think that's the trick, with 1,100 bills, it's challenging to keep ahead of it. But no, they are very much opposed and have been very active in not only opposing it, but advising on the financial notes on particular bills this year, which I had not seen in the past, but they are providing in some of the bills we're seeing, there are fiscal implications, and NHMA has been asked their advice and will comment on how any particular bill or certain bills will have impact on towns and cities and towns. Moving along, hotel occupancy is back, and it is very similar to the prior bill that was introduced last year. There is a hearing on that bill February 1st in 2023 in room 100 in the Senate at 10:45 a.m. I'll be happy to provide written testimony on behalf of the committee. This is one of our
Sure, I might
things
go to
we
that.
support, but if you would like to show up and provide testimony, I'm sure that would be very much appreciated.
Can
You're
we,
not available, are you?
can we get and what time is it?
10:45?
All right. Can we get I know that there were questions last time from this in terms of, just trying to remember they don't record their
No.
committee meetings.
Some of them are recorded, but I don't know how long they retain them from
Sure.
one year to the next. The committee reports, I would believe, would be retained. So again, they.
I remember there was a question in terms of like what the
collection and administration. I think some members were hung up on that piece of it, which I think is easily addressed.
There was also a question on density and whether or not, from a property tax standpoint, if this was already being taken into account. But
Right, don't you, aren't your hotels paying real estate taxes, and shouldn't real estate taxes, the argument is that, shouldn't those taxes then provide the infrastructure support for the tourism? And I know in years past, we've brought the police, the fire chief testifying on similar types of bills to say, there's a difference between a residential call and a 6-story hotel, and what we as a city need to provide for services, and so that the answer is yes, they pay real estate taxes, but also, there are other impacts that aren't fully captured by the real estate taxes with the influx of tourism. So this fund could be deposited in a capital reserve fund, a tourism support fund, a revolving fund, or other special revenue fund. And so it gives some, again, it's enabling legislation, allowing, not everyone has to do it. Cities and towns can do it if they choose. If it's something that it would be beneficial to that city and town, and it's similar to those in the past. So we can take a look and do some digging as far as historically what those questions were and try to address those as far as how it impacts the city.
How close did it get last time?
I thought the House was supportive, what was it, 3 years ago, 2 years ago?
Yeah, it didn't get out of
Yeah.
committee this time. It
Yeah.
went to a committee report.
I think the most support it had was 3 years ago, pre-COVID. And then, it didn't get out last year.
This has some changes compared to the other ones where there's caps, there's minimum occupancy rates. You know, if it's
Yes.
under a $50 or $40 fee, you can't charge it. It's maxed at $2 a day, 24-hour period. So I think they took some of the things they heard in committee.
Yeah.
And some of this had been in ones years before and then dropped out and then came back. I think the 184 and the number of days, sometimes there is, and the cap at the $2. I think there was some concern about creep. If it's $2 this year, it's going to be $5 the year after that, and the $40. I think that was the campground lobby, because there's some sort of limitation on that because they don't want to have to pass that on if it's only a certain amount of money. So this is something that is moving forward. So we'll see what happens. Then there is some bills relative to local authority. House Bill 51 is relative to lobbying, but it's only affecting towns. They are requiring that if folks are going to lobby, they have to have it come through a warrant article. Again, that doesn't apply to cities, but we're watchful of those bills that limit, cities' ability to lobby. House Bill 361, the Peas Board membership, I'll have the mayor's aware of that. That is a bill that is requesting that Newcastle and Rye have one member added to the Peas Board. And then
Jane, is it added or in place of the speaker's choice?
So the speaker gets to pick one now, so the whole thing works by, I forget all of the appointments, but we have one appointment. We used to have 1.5, and then
changes, yeah.
Tom Sherman got it, so our appointment went to Greenland, so Greenland has an appointment. And then, and Greenland shares that appointment with Newington. And then there's appointed by the governor, appointed by the speaker. Who am I forgetting here? There's governor, speaker, Portsmouth.
Portsmouth,
How many people are on the board?
Greenland.
Newington.
Newington.
I'm going to look at it.
I think Newington might have
It's
one of their own,
12
Peggy Lampson's.
G.
Oh, that's right, they have Peggy too.
4I.
Yeah, so Newington has
It has 1.5.
Newington has 1.5.
Yes.
Portsmouth has 1.
Yeah.
So the speaker, the governor, and so this would make it so
The speaker's appointment
would go to.
jointly represent, one person
Rye,
representing Rye
you
and
know.
Newcastle.
Arguably see, Rye with the harbor under the PDA, it's hard to imagine why Newcastle would get a position on there, but I think this is we'll see how this comes. It would be for the next year following, but.
Yeah, it seems like over time, our voice has been diluted
Yeah.
Sure,
somewhat.
yeah. So, I mean, I think if there was going to be, again, if there was to be changes to the makeup, I think our position would be that we'd want Portsmouth's half seat restored on that, but, that's
Yeah.
neither here nor there. The system is holding together and relatively working over the last 30 years to create an economic driver for the entire state, so it's always interesting that they want to change that as much as they do, but,
I think with the growth of the airport and the potential of the actual flights and things, people,
Right.
you look at what it did to, obviously a larger size city, but Worcester, when they revitalized their airport and really became an economic stimulant for that.
Yeah. I was going to say that the cargo facility project emboldened people in Rye to start thinking about and wanting this. So that's probably where this.
Yeah, and they're under
That's
the
where this
flight
is driven.
path.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's a lot of interest. We have not just the $6 to $7 million from the municipal services agreement, which we open up at our peril. I mean, that's worked wonderfully well. And
Sure.
we just don't want to open that up. But, you know, it's the job base. It's 9,000 jobs out there. And jobs, tax revenue. So let's not mess it up.
Yeah, I don't think they have to open the municipal service agreement to change the makeup of this, but again, you know, it's worked well so far for the area, and we'll see. You know, we now will get more updates from Karen on this as well. So.
That's-
Okay, another one somewhat similar to the immunity bill is House Bill 292. It's a theft by public servant. Yeah, and the bill establishes
Sounds
a
bad.
criminal penalty for theft by a public servant who authorizes payment for legal actions against the municipality and creates a right of action against such public servants.
I'm sure we got an example in
Sounds
our
very
history.
retaliatory.
I think, what I heard through the grapevine is, I think this might have to do with the gun stock controversy up in Belknap. And there, I guess somebody paid some attorney fees, and I guess this bill is a product of that.
I think one of the, there was conversation of that, one of the commissioners, yeah. That was a scandal.
So again, it's just bring that to your attention as well. And then we have the various cannabis bills were heard this week. They are voluminous, and they are, as Representative Muse discussed there at our last meeting, they're trying to do everything, you know, rather than do a standalone, you know, and cut things up. Several of them are, you know, lots of pages long. They all sort of have a different approach as to what the money generated from the sale of cannabis would be used for. And so, for instance, there is for House Bill 544, it's 50% of the money goes to the general fund and 50% goes to a municipality. In House Bill 639, 80% go to the unfunded accrued liability for the retirement, which we spoke about already. And once that's paid off, then 80% goes to the Education Trust Fund. However, that is the one that has the meals and rooms included in it, which was discussed at the last meeting, brought up by the Assistant Mayor. And so therefore, the sale of cannabis would be taxed under the meals and rooms. House Bill 643, the revenue would go 50% to the Education Trust Fund and 50% to Health and Human Services. That one's a little, I don't know if that's administrative. There's a lot of community and aid to folks that is baked into that particular bill. And then H Bill 360 is just basically criminal penalties. It's not the legalization piece insofar as it changes the criminalization. Because they're so different and contain a lot of provisions, not just, there are two common themes. One is most of them allow a municipality to regulate how many dispensaries they want to have in their town. There's some enabling legislation baked in there. Then they also give either directly or indirectly, you know, money to a municipality, either through, you know, the meals and rooms or directly, or, you know, through paying the unfunded accrued liability. But I did not submit any, you know, written testimony in support because I wanted some guidance from the committee. Two of them went before Finance. Kate Murray is now one of our representatives. She sits on Finance. It might make sense to find out which one's going to survive, which one's going to come out of
Sure.
committee. And then once it does, then we can, see what's actually moving forward on this bill. Because I can't imagine they'll all go, these three will go through. I imagine there will be one that will, it would be logical, but again,
Have any of them touched on, maybe the assistant mayor would know, as far as I understand, you can't use a credit card to pay for this, so it's kind of like scratchers at the gas station, you got to have cash, like
Yeah. So
how does that work?
my understanding that's still, there are some banks that seem to be starting to accept it. I have a friend who deals with this legislation in Massachusetts. But right now, it's more of it's the banking system.
all of them have language in them relative to banks and money being deposited. I didn't read them carefully enough to know about credit cards, but I do know that there are provisions in each of them that define and acknowledge what this cannabis fund is going to be, and that we are able to put that money in a particular fund and then distribute it these various ways to various state agencies, municipalities, et cetera. So I will be happy to reach out to Kate Murray to see if, what the committee is hearing, what the sponsors are doing, so that we can kind of get a distilled version of what might pass forward and whether or not this committee wants to submit testimony and support. And then the last bill that I had listed, we were contacted by the city manager of Lebanon relative to Senate Bill 221, which is a child care property tax credit for facilities that provide daycare. I reached out to our assessor last night, and she had just two comments. The first comment was it was for both profit and nonprofit childcare, so that's something a bit unusual for tax exemptions. Typically, they're nonprofits or particular individuals, which was a concern as far as maybe opening the door for things like that as far as future legislation, and so that was again opening the door and for-profit entities getting a tax credit. And so I advised the town manager that I would, bring this forward to the committee for consideration. Again, it's a Senate bill. There's no hearing yet. We have time to kind of digest it. If we want maybe a more thorough report back from our assessor, we can get that if we'd like to kind of see what the implications may be. I don't know what the kinds of numbers we have for registered daycares here in the city. We probably don't have a lot. 5, okay.
Like
So
5 for-profit is my understanding.
And is there a definition of a child care in, my neighbor used to do this, sweet old woman, had 4 folk, would take up to 4. Like, what, does this meet the legal definition of a child care center? Is it a certain amount of kids?
Good question.
I'm looking.
Doesn't appear to have any language on
Like, on
Yeah.
its face, would love to know, love to be able to support people to, have the cost of childcare selfishly lower. But I don't know, what the, I'm not sure a for-profit institution would pass on those savings.
The first sentence says, may adopt an exemption for property tax purposes of property that is operated as a, quote, child daycare agency as defined in RSA 170E. So it would be whatever that definition is, I guess,
That's
which I
good.
don't have in front of me.
This is a bill that I've actually been having a lot of conversations about with local women. And the reason I've been doing that is that women have left the workforce at such a huge rate because of COVID, and they haven't been able to return because of lack of childcare. And it's very hard to find ways at the state level to incentivize childcare centers to hire more workers. They have troubles finding them because they can't pay them enough money to get them in. It's not a great model. Childcare is not a money-making model for childcare, even for for-profit childcare centers. It seems like it as a parent because you're paying an unbelievable amount of money for that childcare, but because of the ratios of teachers to children, you're not making the kind of money that you would anticipate in a childcare center. So when we talk about for-profit centers, we're not talking about them making a lot of profit. And by rebating them, like giving them rebates on their taxes, you're essentially giving them the money back that they could then pay to recruit teachers. And so you get more childcare workers, then you all of a sudden can have more classrooms, and you have more childcare. I think that's the thinking here, is that there's not another great way, because if you incentivize on the front end by giving bonuses, then a lot of times you lose workers a few months in. So allowing these individual centers to make that decision on what is the best way to reinvest these funds to recruit workers is the goal.
So have we noticed that has it been regionalized? So we would be lowering the property tax here in Portsmouth. Would it be like in places where the property tax is lower, have they found that there's more childcare providers?
I think that, okay, so that's a different kind of question. It's more about giving a rebate so that they suddenly have a little bit more money in their pocket to hire
Sure.
workers. It's not that in places where the property taxes are lower, their model is built differently. So it wasn't built based upon, I'm going to get an incentive to all of a sudden hire more workers. This is supposed to be just an emergency cash of funds. And then the city gets to decide, even if this passes, we don't have to do it. It's enabling legislation, allowing us to decide whether or not we do
I
it.
guess
So,
I'm not opposed to it. I'm curious on having, it doesn't seem like it's going to create more childcare centers, but allow maybe existing childcare centers to expand?
right, or just to hire more teachers. So right now, a lot of them, pre-pandemic, they were paying around, on average, $12 per hour for individuals that almost all you have to have licensing, and many have college degrees.
Yeah.
So at $12 an hour. So they haven't been able to retain those workers. And in the current job climate, they can't recruit new ones. So many of them have raised their rates to averages of $14 an hour is what we're seeing is the average. And I only know this because I do this on the side where I provide childcare through the YMCA, through my other work. And we've had to raise pay rates to around $14 per hour, but that's unsustainable as a business model without raising the rates on individuals as well, even if you're providing subsidized care. So the end result is that you can't hire as many workers because your business model doesn't work anymore. You can't raise rates beyond a certain level before you start losing subscribers for childcare. And you only have so many people. If we're talking about returning, getting people to return to the workforce, there's a cost balance analysis there. So people aren't returning to the workforce if their cost of childcare is more than their income.
Sure.
So
Not even, not close to that, after tax,
right,
pay
exactly, after
childcare
tax.
After
yeah,
tax, I
so
get it.
so you're trying to give them the incentive to pay a little more and to do a little more recruiting without having to raise their rates.
One nice feature of the way this is drafted is it's just an exemption from the assessed value. So the municipality could scale it to, a percentage of the assessed value as opposed to all or nothing. Our kids went to daycare on Marcy Street, at Joan Coffey's house.
Huh.
And I can't imagine, that house is probably worth $1.5 million right now. So, you know, this is dried up around the city from what it was to when you were a kid or when my kids were
Sure.
little.
I went to Little Blessings and then the Children's Garden, but yes, this is, you know, like, finding childcare is incredibly difficult. It's and it's also, you know, finding folks that, you know, it's easier to build, you know, strong children than fix broken men, so to speak. It's the first 5 years of life, early childhood education, a lot of, you know, you see the effects of society on, you know, just how unequal it is, like, on kids very quickly. So I guess my, you know, I'm supportive of this bill. I don't know how effective it's going to be in terms of the actual, you know, increasing somebody's doing it. It might, you know, where I'm interested to see if it could incentivize more people maybe doing it from, you know, as childcare is defined, like, you have to be licensed in the state. So I don't think this is going to do things like for, you know, maybe it helps where my daughter goes at the treehouse or went, you know, at the treehouse. It could help that in a marginal way. Where I'd be interested to see is if this helps people that are deciding to provide this service out of their home for childcare activity.
Yeah.
That could be a significant, you know, and that's a win-win for, well, it's a cost to the city of Portsmouth, but also deliver something that, you know, we want them to deliver.
The definition is broad
Yeah, I
in
figured it was
the
pretty
statute.
broad,
It's very
yeah.
broad, so it would encompass, you know, quite a lot of types of childcare.
And there's also, just to bounce off that, there's also another bill this session that establishes a fund to help grant childcare establishments and workers more
Yeah.
money.
So, I mean, I don't think this is definitely going to help with the larger, you know, for-profit, or the larger, and it might be for-profit because a individual that's providing childcare out in their home is not going to register as a recognized nonprofit in order to do that. So for-profit likely has to stay in there for that. And I would be certainly happy to take, as we do with the senior tax discount, the disabled veterans discount, bring it to the council and say, you know, we're going to incentivize those folks that want to provide childcare in a recognized way out of their home to be able to find income, you know, help, you know, pay their property tax, also lower their property tax and provide a service to the, so that's where it probably helps more than a, you know, a larger institution that's existing and is struggling to, not that it wouldn't, sure they'd like the tax relief, but hopefully this incentivizes people to take this.
So this, if this is supported, I think it warrants us looking back over the legislative positions and principles that we have and try to figure out where it might fit in those principles. I am,
Are you struggling to find where we can shoehorn this in?
I've got to play, like, it increases local control,
Yeah.
because it allows us to make the decision about the property taxes.
so it's because it's enabling, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's just enabling legislation to give
Right.
more power back to
That's a little-
the city to make a decision.
That is one.
The old bucket of local control. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Jane?
I think that was it that I could find.
Yeah.
So if this committee would like to register and, you know, to support that or take a position, maybe we should take a vote to say we support this. And then I can work with writing testimony when it comes up and reaching back out to the city of Lebanon to let them know that
Who was it in the city of Lebanon that reached out?
Sean
Sean Mulholland.
Mulholland, yeah, reached out.
I'd move that we support SB 221 as a legislative subcommittee.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right.
And I'm happy to speak to it in Concord, if we have testimony.
Sounds good.
If you need me to.
And if you can't testify on the pillow tax, I'd be happy to drive.
I think everybody wants to talk. So I will,
I don't need to talk.
I think I'm always happy for more people to testify on this than less. I'm also aware that it's a weird thing being mayor. If I'm not testifying, they might view it in a different way. But that's, I think, especially around, if we read through our testimony before and make sure that we're hitting on different points, that's great. I was thinking, with the cannabis from a small business owner, that depending on what bill comes out of that. But, I think, we can definitely carpool up there, and it would be impactful and meaningful to have more voices on there, as long as we're not saying the same thing, because then, it's,
Hearings get pretty redundant.
February 1st.
It's the start of my people's holiday.
I can't be there. Yeah, I
All right.
can't do February 1st.
Are there any there's other bills that we have that we're tracking?
There were just some bills of interest. The assistant mayor brought up, there's various bills on sort of evictions and what owners have to notify their tenants, and there's about 4 of them that went to hearing last week.
Yep, and there's one of the couple that I really touched on was HB 44, which is something we've also touched on in land use, which is upzoning. So on where a single house could be built, you could build up to 4 units. Then there's HB 422, which allows municipalities to control rent increases by up to certain percentages. And then there's HB 95, which I don't have my notes on right now, so I can't remember that off the top of my head. Then there is HB 311, which sets up funding from the state for wastewater treatment allocation towards municipalities, so that may be something to look into. Then there's Senate Bill 138, which it's in conjunction with another bill that I don't have listed, but it sets up a PFAS appropriation funding and grants to municipalities. And then one that I think would be really interesting for us to look at, because we get a lot of requests, are HB 93, which authorizes municipalities to reduce speeds seasonally. So I think that may be of potential, because I know.
Peter's going to love changing the signs out.
I know. Well, I think about it in some of the areas that we have, like the electric ones, and some of the areas potentially that are more towards like when you're getting right off of a highway, things like that. So I know we get a lot of requests in parking, traffic, and safety, and DPW gets a lot of requests. But again, those are just, I think that more I would assume would affect like Hampton and the ski mountain, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But those are just a couple that I'm personally
Rent control is
tracking.
coming up. What is there qualifications on that? I know that's coming up in Boston.
I think it just hit committee yesterday.
House Bill 422?
Yeah,
There was
hit
a-
committee yesterday, so I don't have any in-depth notes on it right now. My iPad just died, so I have no notes on it right now.
So what would okay, but it would be interesting to know if that's like income qualifications or, if it's just
My understanding
percentages.
is, yeah, HB 44 is just limiting the percentage. There's also a couple that would allow tenants to break their lease with rent increases. There's another one that I don't necessarily think the town has merit to support, but is, I think, a really important bill that allows people to break their leases if they are victims of domestic violence, which I think is really important.
That's a good one.
Again, sorry, my iPad just died. I can get this list over to Jane, but I think that's an important one to support. And then there's a lot of just tenant right bills that are going through, if you own a certain percentage of units, I don't know exactly what it is, but larger companies are required more advance notice for rent increase. There's a couple House bills that are going through that are really kind of protecting.
Well, I mean,
HB 95.
Yeah, that's, okay.
That's coming out of a Newmarket rep, and that
Yes.
just,
oh, Ellen, yeah.
caps the amount that landlords can, the percentage increase.
Yes. And caps it at 15%.
There's House Bill 401, that's evictions based on the owner's intent to renovate. You've got to give people types of notices depending on the kind of property you are, offer them comparable dwellings. And then, if you permanently take it off the market, then you have to pay a penalty to the tenant that you got rid of. And then House Bill 422 is a list at the registry for rent charges for each unit for every landlord in the state. House Bill 469 prohibits discrimination against a tenant from holding certain vouchers or denying certain vouchers if the rents are within the range of what the vouchers pay for, and also meet a particular type of federal standard for housing. There's House Bill 567, which is particular, that's the one with the notice of rent and the type of property you have and how long you have to give. And if it's a 15% increase, you have to give 6 months notice of the rental increase. So there's a lot of tenant rights bills coming forward this session. Good.
Any other bills or things that we should be considering? I'll just give a quick, since I noticed there was some, Senator Shaheen put through a bill. There's a meeting of some of the mayors when it comes to homelessness. I guess the things that I was surprised to find out in terms of, we have around 100 beds in the city through Crossroads House, and then the auxiliary beds at Operation Blessing. And then we got some state funds for the warming shelters at Crossroads, and then some additional money through a pilot program for finding more permanent affordable house. What I was surprised that Manchester doesn't even have twice the beds that we do. It's like 174. So there's not a great solution so far to homelessness in the state. What it seems like, and then I think that's probably, nationally too, but cities are hesitant to build more shelter beds because lack of a better word, it attracts and becomes a magnet for more homeless. And Concord, for whatever reason, they do not accept state funds because they don't want to list their shelter on the 211, which is run by the United Way for shelters, that was interesting. So I think there's, getting upstream of this from a housing standpoint is critical, but there's going to be a certain percent. And in Manchester, we have a homeless population in Portsmouth. They live, out of sight. They live in the woods. The police know, about them, but they're not camping, out in front of Crossroads House. So there's a lot that is going into it. One of the things that came out of this was the meeting was, simply having more data and requiring cities to list what your residency is of this. And your residency isn't, the city of Portsmouth when you're at Crossroads House. It's where you domiciled before, to try to give a sense of the problem. Because right now it's only handled by the cities with homeless shelters. The Mayor Keene pointed out that the state prison in their county was simply driving about 7 to 9 people a week into their city center and dropping them off. And that's probably their best option without intervention for the state. But just one, I guess, finer point on this. The state has allocated $4 million to this problem. You know, put that in context. To operate the Crossroads House is around $2 million a year. So it's a very tricky, tough situation that has a lot of there's a lot of things that are going into it, and when and people choosing not to even be in shelters and going to encampments is it's interesting that the woman that was in the paper for having the birth and also being related to Dennis Eckersley, was previously in Concord before she moved down to Manchester. When they, were taking the policy of breaking up camps, they didn't do that in Manchester. So it's a very complicated. I wouldn't say there was an opportunity to sign on to a letter. I didn't, mostly because I was sick the week that it was being drafted. But it was very, it seemed like a very political, charged letter with one that was also very focused on Manchester. And I needed to know what, what the status was in Portsmouth. And, the last thing I wanted to do was sign on to a letter and then have, turn around and find out that, the $1 million that we did actually get for increased warming shelter, capabilities would have been kind of slapped over our heads in Portsmouth for not knowing what's going on. So there's a lot that's going on. I don't know if there's good solutions yet, but there is conversation. And as the city manager of Lebanon, Sean, did point out, the cities are on the hook for this when the hotels, and that's the other thing, the hotels rental assistant program is set to end in April, May, and June. So April for single families, June for single people, single occupancy. But it's unlikely that those folks that are living in a hotel are going to go move into a shelter. After 2 years of living in a hotel, the idea of bunking up with other folks in a shelter is probably not, that's not ideal. We do have a requirement to fund that, to fund this state obligation right now through the emergency relief. That's, Ellen has said that she's the only one with an unlimited budget, and so.
That's old legislation, from
Yep.
old constitutional legislation.
And the city of Lebanon actually made an appropriation in their budget to anticipate, something along those lines. But that's, again, rocking. And that was another point that was brought up, was trying to get on the same page on a county level from this, because we have, I think, about 18 folks that are living in the Anchorage Inn right now, but they're from Stratford, because Stratford has, a smart idea to pay up front and in advance 6 months for hotel services, where Rockingham County says, we'll get back to you. So if you're a hotelier, you're probably not super interested in taking Rockingham County's voucher in the future when you can take Stratford County's, now and into the future. But not necessarily for this, but I wanted to update you because I know this made it into the press a fair amount. Councilor Cook?
I just wanted to highlight that there are a lot more people that are homeless that we don't realize here. If you go through Prescott Park late at night, you'll see people sleeping on benches, even in the winter. And my husband has a pattern of going on long walks through Prescott Park late at night. And, so it's not just in the woods. It's not just
Cars.
They're sleeping,
Sure.
in our parks too. And the car situation is increasing. And we're starting to get complaints about it, but we're talking about homeless people who have nowhere else to go, so they're sleeping in their cars. So I think we need to be thinking seriously about how we find a way to address that, to provide a better solution
Sure.
for these individuals.
And on the, we've had, I know that we did get some conversation on, I think there are ordinances on the books right now, but, Mike, or Deputy Chief is it Assistant Chief or Deputy Chief? Deputy Chief Mike Maloney?
Yep.
Deputy Chief. Stated at the PTS that there's been no incidents, and, we can't do drugs, you can't have noise ordinances. We have laws that we can enforce, on these folks that choose to do this. I think where it's difficult is probably in the south end because of y'all live in very tight quarters to one another, trash trucks getting around, those are like, there's a movement of cars that you guys kind of figure out, like, okay, we can park here, we can't park here, but I don't expect this to, I don't know if there's anything that we need to do other than enforce the things that we currently have.
Right. I
I
think,
personally don't think
No.
the banning of, as someone who city, Sprinter van camps around, has done it around the country, there's, I think that we have to make sure that we are not creating laws and regulations for made-up scenarios. As you have said, Deputy Chief has said we have no problem in regards to that, so let's not.
yeah, I didn't want my comment to be misinterpreted. That's
No,
not what I
no.
was suggesting. What I was
Oh, I've
suggesting
heard from many people
is
in
we
the south
find
end, so I didn't mean to.
we find a better option for individuals who have to sleep in their vehicles, because I'm concerned about their access to restroom facilities and shower facilities and whether or not they have that kind of access. And I'm not particularly concerned if they're necessarily sleeping in their vehicles, because I think that's better than them sleeping in the park or on the street if they don't have shelter. I want to make sure that we're kind of thinking ahead to how we can provide support.
And it'd be interesting for maybe a report back on or we can just talk to Ellen around any concerns we have financially from the end of the emergency rental relief.
Yep.
That'd be good to know.
Yeah.
All right. Anything
Also,
else?
just PTS is going to be considering suggested statute relative to limiting camping on city streets and property at the next meeting.
Oh,
So,
okay. When's the next meeting?
The next meeting is Thursday, Feb. 2, 6:30 PM at the Senior Center. We talked as a group about meeting
Rotating the.
at a time that more people might be able to attend, and one of the things we will be teeing up is a conversation about Woodbury Avenue improvements, and we'll continue to talk about that, but this will come up then.
Okay. All right. Wait, a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you,
Those
Kevin.
are